What's up, everyone? Gaijin Gamer here, back with episode 1 of the free-to-play 2024 Raid Shadow Legends series, How to Be a Noob in 2024. And for this first episode, we're going to cover not only the starter champions, but also the various promo codes that are out there, but we'll get to that later. So kicking things off, we have Athel here. And as you can see, she's actually a pretty decent champion. She has a weaken on her A1 here, and it's a triple hitter, which is good for the Fire Knight. And if you don't know what that is, it's not a big deal, but just know it's a boss that you're going to want to attack multiple times to reduce his shield. So then he'll actually take damage and debuffs and stuff like that. And what a weaken does is it makes them deal 25% less damage, as well as take 25% more damage as well. Next up, we have an AoE attack here, as well as it has a 15% extra chance to get a critical hit, which is really nice. And you don't really have to worry about booking it because it doesn't have a cooldown reduction, but the extra damage is still nice. And then finally, she has an increased attack and increased defense for this champion, and also gives her an extra turn, which is really nice. Kind of helps out with the nuke if you don't have those buffs. So all in all, Athel's actually a pretty strong starter champion. Real quickly, she also, as well as the rest of the starter champions, have a 15% ally HP in all battles. So that's pretty standard across the board. But as for Athel, she's pretty strong. She's actually considered probably one of the top 3 recommended starters if you're a new player. But yeah, if she's kind of your style, then yeah, you should definitely go for her. Next in, we'll jump into Galek. Now, Galek is not necessarily a champion that a lot of people recommend, and I think it's mostly due to the cooldowns just not really working out very well for newer players. As you can see right here, this attack right here for his A3 has a 5-turn cooldown. It is giving a decreased defense and attacks 4 random enemies. But that 5-turn cooldown is pretty long comparative to some of these other champions. His A1 just attacks one enemy twice, and then his A2 is an attack all enemies, an extra 15% chance of increasing critical hit, as well as place a 30% increased speed on this champ, which is actually, this skill's pretty nice. If he would have had a better cooldown on this skill and had it not been sort of like a random and more of an AoE skill, this guy would be pretty godlike, honestly. So I could kind of imagine why they decided to do it, just to kind of like balance it to a certain degree. And then, of course, he has the 15% HP for all allies as a leader skill. Now, he's not the best champion. In fact, most people would widely consider him the worst out of the 4 starters. However, he is the poster child for Raid Shadow Legends, as you can see in the icon. 9 times out of 10, his picture's on there. And honestly, he looks pretty freaking cool. That orc with that armor just looks absolutely ridiculous. Next up, we'll cover Kael. Now, Kael is widely considered probably the most popular starter, and actually, I picked him for my free-to-play series. What's kind of unique to him is that he is a poisoner, and poisons are very good for early bosses until you get to hard modes, as well as the clan boss, but we'll cover that later in future videos. But just know that he brings a lot of poison utility, which is very good for boss killing. So his A1 attacks one enemy, and then he has 80% up to 100% chance of placing a poison debuff. His A2 is attacks all enemy, has a 15% chance of inflicting a critical hit, and then fill the turn meter of this champion by 25% for each enemy killed. Now, this is really nice for campaign farming, as if you kill the whole wave, or if you kill 3 out of 4 or whatever, he's able to get, he's able to turn cycle a little bit faster, so he's not taking as much damage from the enemies. And then finally, he has Disintegrate, which this is his heavy hitting skill for a lot of these bosses. It's a 5-turn cooldown, which books down to a 4, as you can see in that last upgrade of his thing. But what it does is attack 4 times at random and has a 40% up to a 50% chance of placing 5% poison debuffs for 2 turns. Now, this is a very nice skill because most bosses, before you hit the hard modes of the bosses, are very weak to poison, and percentage-based damage is always good for any sort of gacha games early on, which makes Kael a very strong starter. Also, he looks pretty cool, Dark Elf. He's got the HP Aura lead as well. And honestly, this is probably my favorite starter of the champions. But yeah, next, without further ado, we'll hop into the last champion, which actually this seems to be kind of a fan favorite. And it's going to be Elhain. Now, she does quite a bit of damage. She does 1 attack and place an extra hit if it's critical, so you kind of build her up with full critical hit chance. And then she also gives herself some crit rate as well, which This her A2 is attacking one enemy, then all enemies afterwards, and this skill hits pretty hard, honestly, and has a 15% extra chance of doing critical hit, which is pretty common throughout the entirety of all of the starters kits. But also places a 30% increased crit rate buff on this champion for 3 turns if the target is killed, which is really nice because that way you don't necessarily have to build her up with the crit rate. However, it does rely on you killing something, so she's really great for campaign farming. But this won't necessarily activate if you're doing clan boss or other bosses content as well. And then the last skill that she has, and this is another thing that she's super lethal for campaign farming, is that she attacks all enemies twice, and the skill hits pretty dang hard. And it's on a 3 turn cooldown, which is nice as well. And again, she has the 15% all ally HP, which is really nice. And yeah, uh, the biggest thing that I'd recommend if you're just starting out is obviously the number one thing is pick who you think looks the coolest or someone who you think you would like to run with different buffs or debuffs or whatever reason you may want to choose these champions. That's the most important thing in these games. All 4 of them will do you well. I think Galek is probably noticeably slower than the other 3, but between Elhain, Kael, and Athel, you really can't go wrong. So yeah, let's hop over to the next section. All right, guys, and for the next section of the guide, we're going to talk about promo codes. Now, promo codes when you're just starting out are very pivotal to your start because what it's going to do, I actually lock mine out for this account. However, if you have an unlocked promo code, you're going to be able to type in a code here, and what it's going to do is going to feed you out a champion or some energy or brews or silver or something you need to succeed. But with the starter promo code that you have to enter within 72 hours of starting your account, typically give you a champion right off the bat. Now, I'm going to link down to Hell Hades' website that he has a full list of working promo codes, and those will give you the codes in order to get the following champions. Let's go ahead and discuss a few of those. My apologies. Let's jump into the index here. So first things first, we're going to talk about Deacon. Now, Deacon is one of probably the stronger ones to choose. He brings a lot of. So first of all, his speed aura is absolutely insane. You probably won't find this until a very long ways down the road when you're just beginning. It's nice to just have it. And the nice thing about his promo code is he does come with an epic book, so something to consider. And the other big thing about his kit is the AoE decrease defense. And not only that, in this game, Raid Shadow Legends, you typically have bigger or smaller buffs or debuffs depending on what they have. So there's also a decreased defense by 30%. Well, this is a big AoE decreased defense by 60%. So, and not only that, but it's for 2 turns. So it's absolutely insane. And it books up to 100% chance. So this guy is pretty nuts. The other thing he brings in his kit is he attacks one enemy twice and a chance of placing leech, which it's a debuff when you attack the mob that has the debuff on it, you are able to then gain a percentage of lifesteal if they have this debuff, and that's even if you don't have like life leech gear or anything like that, you're still able to get that. And then the final thing that he brings, which is some huge utility, is that he has a 3 turn cooldown on this, fills the turn meter of all allies by 15%, and then decreases the turn meter of all enemies by 15%. And then the key thing is once you ascend him, he grants an extra turn, which is absolutely insane. So he turn cycles, he brings an AoE defense down, as well as a leech debuff utility. And in my opinion, the decreased defense, but the speed aura is the craziest thing that Deacon has in his kit. So he's probably one of my favorites. Uh, the other one that you can go with, and the only reason I chose him is Mordecai for this free to play series, is because the login champ synergizes that's currently going on that I spoke about in my last video with the Blade Master. He synergizes with Burn in his kit. So the main thing that Mordecai brings is an HP burn. So his A1 attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of decreasing the target turn meter by 10%, has a 60% instead if the target's under HP burn debuff. The next thing he has is 75% chance of decreasing the turn meters by 15%, as also with increasing your own allies' turn meters by 15%, which is a pretty nice little turn cycling mechanic. And then the big skill that he has a 75 up to 100% chance of placing an HP burn debuff on all enemies for 2 turns, as well as placing a 50% increase attack buff on all allies for 3 turns. Now, this is a huge skill. And this is like basically the bread and butter of his kit right there. He also brings in accuracy in all battles by 40, which can be situationally nice, honestly, like right away. You might be using it over HP anyways, just because it is pretty nice. The static 40 is pretty good. However, this is probably the main reason and why a lot of people picked him is because of the utility with the login champ. I do think that in most circumstances, Deacon's probably better than this guy, but again, you should play with what you like and what you think would fit well with your kit. The next person or little hero that I'd like to kind of show you is actually in the Demon Spawn faction. It's going to be Allure. Now, Allure is very interesting. Um, she the biggest thing that she brings, she has a decreased defense in her A2 as well as a sleep, and it attacks all enemies, so it's an AoE decreased defense, but it's only the 30%. Like I was telling you earlier with Deacon's kit, she has the smaller version of that. As well as sleep is really nice though, as far as like, wave content, Doom Tower and stuff like that. But the main thing that people use her for is for boss killing and turn meter manipulation. This A1 is absolutely sick. Attacks 3 times at random, and typically, if you're facing a boss, it's only one boss, so it hits them 3 times. And what it does is it decreases the turn meter by 25% on each critical hit, and essentially, you will prioritize building her with 100% crit rate. And then the final thing that she has is attacks one enemy and has a 30% a chance of inflicting a critical hit, which is kind of irrelevant because you're going to build her to 100% for her A1 anyways. But the other thing is it'll ignore 50% of the target's defense, so it can hit somewhat hard, but typically the main thing you're using for is the crit rate, support, and the turn meter reduction right here. It's absolutely insane. I would highly consider, potentially going for her as your champ. Again, kind of cool aesthetics from the Demon Spawn faction, and she also has increased accuracy, but it's only limited to the faction crypts. Again, we'll kind of discuss that later down the road, but that is not super impactful as far as that leader skill goes. There's one more, and I'm not sure if it's super. Actually, we'll talk about two more champions. The first one being Sun WuKong. If the Sun WuKong code is still available while you start your adventure, I think you should definitely pick it. He's a legendary champion, which it's kind of rare to get a code for a legendary champion. Time to time they'll have them, but he's actually pretty amazing. He's kind of an arena specialist, but he's used in so many different places in the game as well. He'll be great for campaign farming. He'll be great for Hydra. He'll be great for a lot of things, and he's an absolute menace in the arena. But what he does, he has a chance to place a 25% chance to place a stun debuff uh, the for hitting an enemy, as well as increases to 50% if the target has any buffs, which can be nice, but a lot of times your enemies will have block debuffs, which won't allow you to place that. This is an absolute smack right here. What it does is attacks one enemy and ignores 50% of the target's defense. With any XX damage, it's going to then cause that to the rest of the enemy's team. And it'll also ignore 50% of the target's defense. And it's absolutely disgusting and destructive. So essentially what you'll do is you'll get a enemy champ down in the arena, down to low health. You'll use this, and then it does an AoE skill to the rest of the enemy team, allowing you to just absolutely mop up, or also used for wave content too. Same kind of principle where you're able to then get an enemy wave down or a minion in the wave down, and then use the skill, and then it AoEs the rest of the wave. The final skill that he has, which is super nice, is attacks all enemies before steals all buffs from all enemies and then places a block debuff on them for 2 turns. This is actually a really huge ability, as like especially in the arena, there's a lot of buff heavy meta right now where you're trying to steal those and then also placing a block debuffs, which is pretty insane. And it hits decently hard too, but the skill 2 is the thing that hits the hardest for him. And then the final thing, I forgot to mention, but it's skill 2 also. If you don't kill the target, it then places a sheep on them, which can be good, can be bad because the sheep doesn't do much damage, but it's pretty much impossible to kill. So just kind of helps you CC your enemies if you need it. And then his passive is he'll revive every third turn with 100% turn meter and 100% HP. It's actually disgusting, as you can kind of build some tanky champions to kind of stay alive if he dies, and then every 3 turns he's coming back with full health and full turn meter, and he's just absolutely disgusting. And then the final thing he has, which is arguably, again, one of the more important things about his kit, is increases ally speed in arena battles by 28%, and that you'll see that all over the high-end metas right now. 28% is absolutely disgusting on the higher end for arena leaders, and you can have it completely free to play, which is absolutely disgusting. And now, finally, the final hero we'll talk about for promo codes is going to be in the Undead Hordes faction. It's going to be a character called Miscreated Monster. Oh no, you know what? I think he's in Knights Revenant. My bad. Yep, here he is. And this guy is an absolute menace for a lot of content as well. What he does is attacks one enemy twice. Each hit has a 15% chance of placing a stun debuff. And then if he's attacking someone under a stun debuff, he has then a 50% chance of placing a decreased defense and the big version of that, as well as his damage based on HP. It's kind of important to note. So you won't necessarily see the decreased defense utility against bosses, obviously, because they can't be stunned. However, in wave content, that can be nice, but the main thing that it brings is the stun for like Doom Tower waves, as well as waves going to some of the major bosses. The other thing he brings is attacks all enemies, has a 50% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. Places a shield debuff or a shield buff on allies for 3 turns equal to 25% of the damage inflicted. Now, this is really nice because it can be quite a decent sized shield. Super good for spiders because it has a chance to stun the spiderlings, and then also creating a HP shield on to all of your allies, which can save them if you're being attacked while you're progressing in the spider's lair. The last thing, this makes him pretty viable for clan boss, at least in the early game, is this he places a 50% ally protection buff on allies except for this champion for 3 turns. Heals this champion by 50% of max HP, as well as places 15% continual heal buff on this champion for 3 turns. Now, essentially, what ally protection buff does is it allows this champion to take some of the damage that would be caused to the other champions that are under this buff. And what it does is essentially any bosses that do a lot of damage to your DPS heroes that are super fragile, it allows them to take a percentage less of it. So, and he'll take that for them, and it just causes your damage dealers to really excel and succeed, and you to do more overall damage because of it, because the damage is getting dispersed. And honestly, I think it's reduced as well in many cases. So it's a really strong buff, honestly. And then the final thing he does is place a fear debuff on attacker for 1 turn whenever allies attack while under an ally protection buff. This can be situationally good. Um, Fear is pretty good. It has a chance for you, the person who's under the fear debuff, to kind of miss their turn or just do nothing for their turn. So it can be situationally good if the target can be affected by that, but bosses can't. And the final thing is increases ally HP in arena battles by 33%. So this guy is actually pretty decent for the arena. It helps your team survive longer. And yeah, actually does a decent amount of damage too because he's HP damage based. But yeah, that concludes like who I'd recommend. There's a few other starter promo codes. However, I think these are probably the strongest options. But definitely look into exploring some of the other ones as well if these don't necessarily fit what you're trying to play as far as aesthetic and kits. But yeah, without further ado, I'm Gaijin Gamer, signing out.